Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Jenny Fielding, the co-founder and managing partner at Everywhere Ventures and the author of the new book, Venture Everywhere.
I'm a venture capitalist, and what that means is I invest in startups at the earliest stage of their journey. So just as they're getting going, sometimes even idea stage, we bet on founders, on their ideas, and on their potential. And previously, I was an entrepreneur, so I've walked in those shoes and kind of taken a lot of the learnings, especially the hard ones, and parlayed it into my own style of investing in companies.
Awesome. And I look forward to hearing that story. Again, you're one of the preeminent investors and one of the, unfortunately, still a handful of, small amount of female investors in the space, but you're one of the OGs, obviously. And so delighted to have you talk about that a bit. But let's talk about that. I mean, how does one go from high school, college to become an investor? So take us through that journey.
Yeah, well, I like to say I'm both an accidental entrepreneur and an accidental investor. And that seems to be the through line of my life is kind of stumbling into things, but not really seeking them. So started much more traditional. So I grew up in New York City. I ended up in law school. I worked in finance, kind of like took a very different path. And then one day I had an idea, not for a startup actually, like, because that kind of terminology at the time wasn't even in my head. Like most of my friends were bankers and consultants, and I just like didn't come from that, that kind of tech ecosystem that really just didn't exist in New York at the time. But I had a problem that I wanted to solve. And like most entrepreneurs that I call empath entrepreneurs, right? So they're solving for their self. I was just trying to, figure this thing out for myself. Well, that kind of turned into getting co-founders, turned into starting a company in my living room, and growing that company to more than 100 people, running it for a number of years and having an exit. So very accidental. Again, didn't start out seeking to be an entrepreneur, but just saw something in the world, as many entrepreneurs do, that just didn't sit right. And I wanted to find a solution for that. So that was how I started. I think once I got the not just entrepreneurial, but kind of the tech bug, I knew I was never going back to kind of traditional, law, finance, all that kind of stuff. Like it was just in my blood. And I was so excited just about, how you can make an impact in the future. And so I started another company. And unfortunately, that one was not as successful. But I actually think, looking back, I probably learned a lot more from that second one. I learned a lot from the first one because I'd made a lot of mistakes. But, my biggest attribute, I think, was timing. And as many entrepreneurs know, a lot of things are out of your control. And, market tailwinds, oftentimes, you have nothing to do with them. But we got pretty lucky the first time. I'd say those tailwinds turned into headwinds for our second company, which was actually a really good idea. And I've seen many companies go on to great success kind of, around a similar space. It was a text message marketing company. But at the time in 2010, many of your younger listeners won't even be able to relate, but I think you will. It was a little bit like offensive to get marketing on your phone. Your phone was this like very personal thing where you called your mother. And it really wasn't, the supercomputer that we all have that we're glued to where we can do anything. And many people like honestly run their whole businesses on their phone, right? It really just wasn't that. And unfortunately, it was just a timing issue. Like we had a lot of good things. We had a lot of great team members. We had, good backers. We had a lot of good, got a product roadmap, but we just couldn't get people to kind of get over that psychology of it being intrusive. Well, now, I mean, like what people get on their phones, like can't even talk about. So, that's just an example of being at the wrong side of a trend or, just, too early. Um,
Well,
so
let's
those
go
were
back, Jane, let's go back to the first company. What was that? That huge
That was
success.
yeah. So so the story is, I had a boyfriend in Germany. I was making lots of international phone calls, and my mobile phone bill was about $1,000 a month. So very different than now calling again, different time, 2007. And I looked around, I was working at JP Morgan at the time, and there were all these bankers that were actually not from the US, and they were calling friends and family, and they were using these like calling cards. I mean, these are people working at JP Morgan, and like they were also like going down to the little bodegas and getting their little calling cards. So I just thought, wow, like there's a few different use cases here, and yet the technology is just so antiquated. And so, could we create something to automate essentially what a calling card would do through an application on your phone? The iPhone had just launched, and all of a sudden, we could do a lot more on our mobile devices. So again, started out solving a personal problem I had, calling the boyfriend, and turned into, a really kind of impactful company because now people, instead of, paying hundreds of dollars a month to call their loved ones back in countries that they came from, they could literally do that for a few dollars. And so that was just this like kind of incredible moment where you could like really help people, change their daily experience.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying. That's really interesting. All
Yeah.
right, so bring us back to where so second company, not so
Yeah.
great. Then what did you
Had
do?
to shut it down, was working on my third company, and somehow ended up on the other side. So I thought I was going to take some time off. I was going to go on some big travels. But I ended up, at a venture fund called Techstars. And when I met the founders of Techstars, they said, do you ever thought about kind of being on the other side and investing? Which I had, but I was really kind of thinking about my next company. And they said, yeah, come spend a year or two with us, and I think you'll learn the other side. And I think what I really loved about that platform is it wasn't just about cash, it was really about community and resources. And that was the thing that was most lacking in my entrepreneurial, journey. Because again, I came from New York City, not Silicon Valley. At the time, there was just like no community here, which is like hard for people to believe because it's, second largest tech ecosystem. But there just wasn't. There weren't co-working spaces. There wasn't venture capitalists. There weren't meetups. I mean, there was just like nothing going on. And everyone said, if you're going to build a software company, you need to go out west. But I kind of looked around and I said, like, that doesn't exactly make sense to me because if you look at all of the pieces that we had in New York, it seemed like a great place to build a company. There wasn't that community, but I mean, we had capital. We didn't have venture capital, but we had, lots of rich people, Wall Street, real estate people. So it's like, there was a lot of money sloshing around. We have every multinational here that you could sell to or partner with, incredible engineering schools where great talent was coming out. So I mean that, New York had so much to offer, and yet people were saying you had to go to California. And I thought, that's like really weird. So I was definitely one of the earlier people building companies here. And, it was really fun back then. It was a small community and it was just, kind of the beginning.
Yeah. And so I remember that. There's, oh my God, through the years, just going into the city, it was so exciting. I remember meeting Marissa Meyer at some meetup.
Yeah.
There's just one distant memory, but
Yeah.
early days. So then you went from Techstars to what?
Yeah, so the other kind of through line in my journey is that I tend to kind of bootstrap things. So while I, bootstrapped my first company, I was working at JP Morgan and started that company nights and weekends. I did the same thing with my fund. So I was working at Techstars, kind of came up with the thesis for everywhere based on my entrepreneurial journeys, coupled with, many years working with entrepreneurs, through the accelerator model. And I thought, maybe I could come up with some type of hybrid where we had a lot of the kind of community and ethos of maybe an angel group, but we had the structure and governance of a venture capital firm. And so we came up with the concept of our fund, which is unique in that we are backed by all founders and operators. So the people that give us money are limited partners, are other builders, and we've got 500 of them. And so that large community is what not only fuels our deal flow, but really helps us support our large portfolio. So we, tried to come up with a hybrid. We looked at venture capital and we said, like, what do we think's working and not working? And can we iterate on a model that seemed a little static?
That's great. And so this was started up, was it during the pandemic then, right?
Yeah, 2000, well, we actually started in 2018. We did a proof of concept fund. And then we launched our second fund in 2020. So kind of, right during the pandemic, which was delightful. And yeah, we've been going ever since. I was again bootstrapped it, so like we were part-time. My co-founder and I both had other jobs, and so we were working on our fund part-time. And then in 2022, I decided to leave Techstars. My co-founder joined me, and we decided to kind of launch a proper fund. And so our last fund was in 2022.
Got it. Got it. And everywhere. How did you come up with that name?
Well, it's definitely gone through some iterations. But our first fund was really focused on New York. That was the ecosystem we were living in, and where I'd built companies before. And the thesis was like, if we could find 50, great founders, if they could become our limited partners, people that give us money, and our source of deal flow, like we could really see a lot. And so the second iteration of the fund was like, okay, if this works in New York, maybe it'll work in London, and maybe it'll work in LA, and maybe it'll work in Sydney, Australia. So we started to partner with entrepreneurs around the world to kind of spin up these nodes of founders, both that wanted to be investors, because many of them were angel investors, and who wanted to kind of join our community as portfolio. So it just, like I always tell people, I mean, we've been doing this almost 7 years. It just like you can't run a global fund overnight. You have to just spend years and years developing, these networks and these nodes and cultivating them and nurturing them. And so, at some point we looked around and we said, wow, we've got, probably 30 of these communities around the world. They're somewhat self-organizing, but we get really great deal flow, really great intel. They help us with diligence, with sourcing, with supporting. Why does it actually matter where these companies are being built? And so we kind of looked at, our geographic mandate and we said, honestly, like we don't really care where founders are based. We believe innovation's everywhere. Capital traditionally has been constrained to a few places, but like now that's really opening up. And where is a company based if one founder is in Austin, Texas, one is in London, and one is in Singapore? Like, I don't know. So, like, why have geographic constraints? So, we felt like the name everywhere really encapsulated our ethos and kind of the way that we see the world.
Yeah, I love that. And talk to us a bit more about your thesis and what types of checks you cut. What are you looking for?
Yeah, so we invest at the pre-seed, which we define as small rounds, typically about 500K to 2 million. So not the Silicon Valley, like I'm raising a $10 million pre-seed. So these are small, modest rounds, oftentimes, first-time founders, but, not always. But really that kind of foundational capital that helps, really get the business off the ground. Our deal flow comes from this community of 500 founders and operators. So as you can imagine, we see lots of different types of companies and verticals and business models. So that's really exciting. As we, started investing over the years, we started to like look at patterns and where some of our top performers were coming and like couple that with like where we see the world. And so I would say, we're focused on software, although we're somewhat agnostic in terms of the areas that we invest in. What we like to say is that we invest in what we call the resilience economy. And so what that means is what's the technologies, the software, the infrastructure that's making certain verticals, more viable and more resilient. For instance, like we're not investing in healthcare delivery, so to speak, but we invest a ton in healthcare infrastructure. Rather, maybe it's on the EHR side, electronic medical records, or maybe it's underlying AI models that help clinicians assess information more effectively. So, what's the technologies that make those verticals really hum? And so, I'd say we do a lot in kind of fintech, climate, logistics, future of work, and of course, healthcare. But again, really somewhat agnostic as long as it's that kind of foundational infrastructure layer.
Got it. And what since you're all around the world, well, first of all, you have 500 LPs. Do they think they have sort of preferences if they send you deal flow, or do you sort of lay down the law and say it's going through the system?
I mean, I think the system, they are the system. So what's really cool is like if I get a healthcare deal that comes to me from you or from anyone in the community, I can like on our Slack channel very quickly send it out to 50 of our LPs that are all in and around the healthcare space and get a directional read of like, hey, what do you think of this? And within 30 minutes, I have, like so many people getting back and saying, oh, Jenny, there are a million of these, or this is really interesting. Here are a few questions you should ask. And so, like, we use them as a source of, information and diligence and see that as a real asset. So, yeah, but I think, people are very understanding just in terms of, we can't invest in all the companies that come through the pipe, but I would say everything that gets to us has already been like layer one filtered because these folks are all builders. They're building companies and they've got kind of a good view on things like product and business model, as opposed to stuff that comes randomly through our website, which we do get a lot of that as well.
Right. And what about leveraging AI to screen? Are you using those tools, or are there good tools yet to help with that sort of tedious, when you get thousands of ventures every year?
Yeah, we've spent the last, 7 years building kind of a stack of collaborative tools that allow us as our fund to be more efficient. So, for instance, like way before the pandemic, we made a decision that like the Monday morning partner meeting, right, where everyone gathers was like somewhat antiquated. My co-founder lives in LA. We have some teammates in Europe and New York. And so could we do a lot of our work async? And so we really relied on Slack and some of the other software tools like Airtable to allow us to go through our process in a really effective way, not necessarily gathering. So my point is that we've spent many years and lots of time kind of thinking through lots of automations that allows us to invest in high a lot of companies in a short amount of time. So we've invested in 300 companies, and we're two general partners. And everyone says like, well, how do you do that? And that's through a lot of the automations that we've built. So, has AI been transformational for our company? Not necessarily. I mean, we've been using kind of basic, automations to, synchronize our business for the last, 6, 7 years. But it is exciting, obviously, with some of the tools now to make things like deal memos and, some of our kind of internal data more efficient. So I'd say like it's exciting to have those tools. It hasn't been transformational for us yet because we've always kind of used a lot of that.
Got it. And what about since you are all around the world, what trends or where are the hot spots? Is there any sort of indicators you're seeing that are sort of really interesting?
Yeah, I mean, we do a fair amount in Africa. I'd say mostly Nigeria and South Africa. We see obviously a lot of fintech and infrastructure coming out of those communities. What's exciting about them is sometimes where you don't have a lot of legacy infrastructure like you do here, you can institute new technologies, much quicker with less red tape in some ways. So there's obviously challenges of doing businesses in places like that. We do a lot in LATAM as well, specifically Brazil and Mexico. But the speed at which, you can, implement something at a big company, we just don't really see here because we have so much kind of, legacy software debt in all of our companies and our government that you can't just like rip things in and out, right? It takes like years to integrate them. So it is exciting in developing countries how fast, some of the implementations can work.
Got it. And what do you see? I know you teach at universities and you're active in the, some of the entrepreneurial programs. What are you seeing there? What's sort of piquing your interest and what are some of the things or trends you've seen over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. While I was at Techstars, we worked on an application basis. And for my programs, I'd get, a few thousand applications. So you get to see, in mass, like what entrepreneurs are thinking about. It's very similar at the university. So I co-head the startup studio at Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island. And there's about 400 students in the startup studio class. And so they're all coming up with ideas, building startups over, the course of the semester or the year. And you definitely see kind of these waves as new technologies get rolled out. So it's been fun to see like the evolution from, crypto to AI, and you just see like so many, so many cool, variations of what can be, right? These students are very, very creative. I'd say in this last batch, we've seen a lot of like, I'd call it workflow automations. People are really bored with, boring tasks, or they're really sick of boring tasks, I should say. And we're seeing a lot of students trying to make, simple things like campus life or, all these, their calendars or whatnot more efficient. And so that's been really fun, because I always think about like, oh, when I was a student and like, when I had to sign up for classes or I had to do all these things. So we're seeing a lot of like workflow automation, I'd say, which is fun. We always see a lot of healthcare, and this year we've seen a lot in the kind of wellness and mental health space, which can kind of give you a sense of what students are dealing with, right? It's very stressful being students at a lot of these campuses, not just the academic stress, but just everything that's going on in the world. And students really want to be creating solutions for their peer group. And I think that's been really kind of interesting to see again, going back to that empath founder building for themselves and their community. We see a lot of that on campus.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'd be curious to see what's next, and you'll have a sort of a first peek at that. But what about the environment, right? There obviously is this lot of anxiety and stress in the world today. How is that affecting sort of the funding environment? I know it's impossible to forecast, but how do you see things?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the tech bubble 2020 to 2022 were kind of some crazy days. I don't think they were very healthy. We struggled as a fund. And then we saw a drop off on a crash that also didn't seem healthy, right? And so I think that we were hoping 2025 would get us back into some equilibrium, right? So 2023, 2024 were very challenging fundraising environments, except for maybe a select group of, infrastructure AI companies who were sucking up most of the cash. It was very, very challenging. So I think that, what people were hopeful for with the new administration was things like liquidity coming to the market through more M&A, more IPOs. I think people were excited about that. Some of the crypto regulations getting sorted out also could bring, some good liquidity and some new innovation. So I think there was like a lot of hope. It is early to say, but here we are mid-March, and it seems like the markets are a little shaken up by what's happening, and we're not really seeing that reflected, this kind of calm return to normal in venture yet. So I don't know. I mean, we haven't seen a ton of IPOs. We haven't really seen much on the M&A. Still early days, but I think that was kind of the hope. So we'll see. To be determined. I'd say right now it feels kind of similar to 2024 and 2023, which is a bit of a have and have nots, right? So some rounds get done quite quickly, depending on the vertical, the team, the momentum that they build in the business. And some deals, which I think are great, just take forever to get done. They stagnate, and it's kind of hard to understand like which camp you're in. It's not, these clear like check a box and you're in one camp. So I'd say it's still pretty binary and still pretty turbulent.
Got it. Yeah. Time will tell, right?
Right.
What about the new book you have? I heard a rumor that you have a new book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Venture Everywhere, and the book talks about many of the journeys that I've just shared with you in the context of a larger framework of entrepreneurship. So the book is about global entrepreneurship, which is obviously the theme of my fund, and what we can all learn from founders building companies far from the glow of Silicon Valley. And when I interviewed these entrepreneurs, I noticed some common themes and perspectives about the way they view the world, which I kind of distill into what I call this everywhere mindset. And it's kind of these archetypes of how you build companies and how you prepare your mind for entrepreneurship, which is so intense. So the book is 12 chapters, 12 countries, 12 entrepreneurial journeys, and people you might not have heard of, but they have gone on to, have public companies, to have huge exits. I mean, these are like really incredible entrepreneurs, but we hear about the same folks, right? Like we know a lot about Mark Zuckerberg, we know a lot about Bill Gates, we know a lot about Elon Musk. And so it's really kind of a celebration of people who've come from very different backgrounds, and how they've kind of persevered and the resilience that they've had to build the businesses that they've been able to build. And so what's that psychology and what are those kind of traits that we can all learn from?
Yeah, that sounds exciting. And it really broadens people's perspective, right? We always hear the Zuckerbergs and the Bezos, and we sometimes don't realize there's so many amazing entrepreneurs around the world, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
also, I mean, it's interesting. So I'd say the book is a pretty counter to, the kind of current narrative in the US right now. We seem to be going into more of like an isolationist mentality of like looking in. The book thesis is really that, we're living in global times. And that if you don't kind of, get prepared to be working with people around the world to kind of understand and have empathy for where they come from and to have a global mindset, like, you're going to be left behind. And I believe that that is 100% true, despite what's happening right now. Well, 20 years ago, you and I could work in an office and we might only interact with people from the US. There's no way that that's your experience now. Your customers, your teammates, just everyone is so global with distributed, working and living. We have to kind of think about building companies and building, our own resilience to be able to handle, that kind of the global influences.
yeah, for sure. And I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. So for folks who want to read it and learn more. But let's talk about that a bit more. So as we both know, global hubs, ecosystems have developed around the world, right? Especially from 20, 30 years ago, right? Now everyone has learned and sort of borrowed sort of the approaches that we've developed, at least in the States and other Western countries. So if you were to give advice to an entrepreneur in the US, where would you say, and they could live anywhere, let's just say anywhere in the US, would you recommend certain places or would you say, it doesn't matter, be close to your family?
Yeah, I think that you need to develop networks. And to do that, you need to spend time in different places with different people. And those networks, like once you kind of develop it, then I think you have the ability to, run your company wherever you want to run it. So I think it's hard right now if you just like were starting a company and you were living in a very rural place and you had no community and no network. I do think that that is challenging. It's not impossible, but it is challenging. But really, like what's interesting about the book is that many of the founders, come from very, rural places. So one of the founders, he grew up in a small town in Pakistan. No one in his family had gone to and had any type of schooling. And his family like owned a small little neighborhood store. But they had big ambitions for the next generation and really like focused on, getting them educated. He came to the US. Anyway, fast forward, he's built like pretty much the most successful, I think, company in the Middle East that was sold to Uber for $3 billion, right? And so, why this guy? Well, he built his networks, right? He came to Silicon Valley. He lived in London. He went to Dubai and he, kind of built those relationships, that trust, that network that he could, really, have this kind of crazy, amazing story. And I think we all need to do that. So if I was an entrepreneur now, I think living in or near a tech hub, at early days and developing those networks and making sure that you've, got that community and those resources. But then I think you can live wherever you want, right? As long as you're have an ability to kind of travel, be mobile, be open, to different types of, cultures and philosophies, I think the world has really changed.
Yeah, that's great advice. What about for an entrepreneur outside the US? Can't get in the US just because. Um, where would you, I guess you'd probably give the same advice, but are there certain areas around the world which are maybe more vibrant and better than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. So I lived in London so I lived in New York, obviously, as the kind of startup ecosystem was really catalyzing, 2007, 8, 9. And then I lived in London after that, and London was like a little bit behind New York, but caught up pretty quickly. And so, I was the first tenant at Google campus that opened in East London, and it was a very exciting like early days in London. So we saw that ecosystem. So I think we see waves of, startup community development. And, again, you don't have to be in New York or San Francisco, but I would say if you're outside of the US, pick an ecosystem that's really, up and coming or, has really good talent, has resources, has venture capitalists, kind of has that great, topsoil mix. And that can be in places like Berlin, or it can be in places like Portugal, or it could be in places like Lagos, Nigeria, or Cape Town. There's incredible stuff happening in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Mexico City. And so these places are hotbeds for startup activity all over the world. Now, can you be in a small town in Mexico with no resources? I think, again, that's tough. But if you can get yourself to Mexico City to, build that network, I mean, that's a fantastic place.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing great things about Mexico City as a hub. Yeah. But this has been really illuminating. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today. We usually, you know, give some quick tips. And so we call it just one thing. So is there one tip for entrepreneurs who are looking to start a new venture that you'd like to give?
Yeah, I think there's this misperception that you need to, throw everything away and start a business. And the truth is, I mean, I bootstrapped two startups, right? And I bootstrapped my fund. You can do small things to get yourself in the game. Doesn't mean you need to walk away from your job and do all of that at once. Eventually, you will need to if that's what you want to pursue. But I think that that makes entrepreneurship more accessible for many people. Start small. Like I started nights and weekends while I was working at JP Morgan, in my living room with, some great co-founder who were technical, right? So you can start small and see where things go before you make that huge leap. And I feel like that's kind of against the narrative that you just read about and hear about is everyone has to be all in, at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But on the other hand, there's the rise of the side hustle is certainly having an effect too. People seems like everyone has one, so that's really a great sort of trend that we're seeing, right? And hopefully those can develop into full-fledged businesses. I just spoke to someone the other day who's debating whether to move into his business, um, and it's just so exciting to sort of flip the switch, right, and to actually make that transition. Scary, but exciting, right?
For sure.
What about for entrepreneurs who are raising money right now? Any tips you like to give?
Where do I start? So I think the strongest thing you can do if you're going to raise money is spend the time preparing to do it. And we find that many founders, they're kind of thrown into fundraising, deer in the headlights, and all of a sudden they need to scramble to put their investment pipeline docs together, to get their deck together, and all these things. So I think you need to give yourself a few months to do proper research on who the best investors are for you, how you're going to connect with them to get all your material together and really just, spend more time front end before the fundraise as opposed to like, oh my gosh, like things are kind of taking off. We need cash, go. And so, kind of re-architecting that narrative around, when you start a company, you have your model and start planning like when you think you're going to actually need capital and back out the numbers from there and give yourself, 3, 4 months to just get all your data room and everything up to par.
Got it. This has been great. Great conversation, Jenny. Great insights. We usually end our conversation with a quote, a saying, or something that's important to you. What would you like to share?
All right, I am going to share a little part of my book because I think it's a little unexpected. But so this is the book, Venture Everywhere. People think it's about entrepreneurship and venture capital, but I'll read you the quote. So, more than anything, though, venture everywhere is a permission slip for the person who wants to live, travel, build, and experience all life has to offer. You don't have to be born in Silicon Valley to be a great entrepreneur, and you don't need what you think you might need to build your career or business or evolve in any way to stay relevant. You don't have to play by the rules and live in one place. Success doesn't mean 20 years at a huge corporation and a gold watch upon retirement. It means charting your own path.
I love that. That is a great um, clip from your book. Thank you for sharing that. And where's the cover from? How did you choose that picture?
I mean, the book is a travel journey. I hope people will enjoy it. I go lots of great places, and I have, one of my friends who's actually mentioned in the book, just as an incredible designer, and she helped me with the cover. So it's
Where is that?
the long
What
winding
state?
road.
Where is that, a state or a country? Where is that? Do you know?
It's out west. It's
It's
out
out
west.
west. Okay. That looks like it's out west. Well, got it. Again, thank you so much, Jenny. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your leadership in the community. It is so important these days. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.